Okay, doon sa mga tao nakikinig nito through the podcast, I would recommend watch this in YouTube instead of the Apple Podcast. You can also do Spotify because may video naman doon. But you have to see the image for you to appreciate this specific podcast. There's a lot of images being shown. And when you see this specific slide, there's an image on a leaf. It's a photograph. I mean, obviously we've been talking about photographs since the start now. I mean, since the start of the episode. But then again, what we're saying is that it's a defined image. I mean, there is a certain definition, gradation, graphic element on the leaf that probably would require a certain screen for it to manifest itself on the substrate, which is the leaf itself. So yun. So as Steph mentioned, it's an acetate, no? So pinatong lang siya.
Yes, and so the color that you see is the chlorophyll. There's no ink. There's
Okay. Pero can you do this on a live leaf? Or is it has to be severed from the tree?
It has to be severed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sige. Kasi iniisip ko kung if you can leave it, kasi, I mean, I'm thinking, what if, kung halimbawa, if you do the same process, pero it's still attached to the tree or the plant, I'm thinking parang, whoa, I mean, this is alive. I mean, this image is alive. I mean, in a way, it's, diba, parang, how can you fix an image on an organism? We cannot do that. But then again, if magawa mo yun, no? I mean, I'm curious, baka, kasi parang imagine mo kung if you have a photograph on a plant, I mean, a living plant na hindi severed from the plant, parang, whoa, atas yung show mo, no? Parang,
it's the tree. Your show is the tree.
Exactly, di ba? Parang, whoa, what the heck is this? It's photography. Yeah, I mean, anyway, sige, so going back to your next slide. Sorry. Excited ako na nawawaw ako, sorry.
Yeah. It won't work because it won't turn yellow since it's still alive. It's still attached. So since I'm so purist about this process, I'll only cut a leaf. You know, plants have to be trimmed because if you don't trim them, they're just gonna be too unwieldy and then they'll die. So to keep them healthy, you have to continually trim them every now and then. So I'll only use a leaf if I'm trimming the plant. I'm not, killing the plant. I'm just trimming the leaf to make it healthier. Okay, so this next image, this time I was making I have a whole collection of letters and postcards sent to me my entire life. And letter writing is a fading or dying form of communication. So that's why I chose that subject for this chlorophyll print. It's a dying art form. I hadn't received a real postcard in more than 10 years. The first one I received recently last December, which was sent to me by Erwin Romulo, was like one of the rare ones. The others, maybe if you look at my box of postcards, 10 years ago was my last real one. And anyway, I was marrying subject matter with process, which is what Leslie de Chavez did, which is what I also did in the Anthotype installation. It's really important for me to combine process with what you're trying to say, process with subject matter. And it's just another example.
So yung substrate nito is paper, but you used chlorophyll as your emulsion.
Oh no, this is a leaf. I just cut the leaf.
It's a leaf?
Yeah. Like if you look closely, it's green, right?
Beans pala to.
Yeah, it's a leaf.
Pero malaki siya kasi.
Yeah, big leaf.
Okay. Akala ko yung emulsion is chlorophyll or parang plant-based pigment, and then similarly to what you did, parang I was thinking na akala ko yung pala leaf pala to, akala ko papel. Astig.
Calocasia Calocasia leaf is a tropical, Calocasia is a tropical plant, and tropical plants are very good for chlorophyll printing.
Tapos yung process nito is similar din kanina na you printed the image through acetate first. And then
Yes.
okay. Would a projection work?
A projection will work. There is a woman, she's actually everyone's mentor who works in alternative processes in anthotypes and chlorophyll prints. She projects onto grass that's she makes it vertical. She makes the grass vertical. Then she projects on the grass, and there's going to be an image, a portrait. She projects she projected her family photo, I think. Yeah, her family photo. And so it was a massive, as big as the wall, grass that was put vertical. And the projection was huge. So she made a massive chlorophyll print. So it was shown in Pari Photo last year. So if you go to Pari Photo, they consider chlorophyll prints photographs, since obviously it's Pari's photo. Yeah, it's already in major photographic shows, international photographic shows. They show chlorophyll prints.
Siguro parang a look back lang on the history of this thing. Kasi syempre Anthotypes, I mean, again, parang 19th century or 19th century practice pa rin siya. I mean, in a way parang it's still in the same decade as the development of of what we think of as a photographer. There are scientific experiments on the various substances and doing also various processes on how to create an image using light. I mean, that's the idea. You have the heliograph, you have your salt prints, you have your cyanotypes, you have anthotypes. But then again, curious ako kasi syempre this is photography chisme, so kailangan ko siyang i-relate sa Pilipinas pa rin, diba? So in a way, even if nagkakaroon ng resurgence, would you say ba, Steph, na there is a resurgence of alternative processes in the Philippines? That is, I mean, syempre we have friends who have been using or have been doing alternative process for a long time na. Some of them have been doing it since 70s, no? But to a certain extent, what I'm observing, kasi ako lang, syempre, I'm specialization ko is from 2000 to 2023 as the period as my specialization of study, no. So part of what I do as a teacher, I also try to think a specialized period because there are already authors writing about syempre historical photographs, although there are very few of them. You have your artistic criticism about photography in the Philippines, but historical, I mean, periodicity, yan siguro yung a more technical term for it is yung periodicity of year 2000 to 2023. That's what I try to focus on, kaya kadalasan it's contemporary Philippine photography. And I noticed na before wala tong ganito. I mean, there is very little that is being done on this. Probably the alternative processes is a very niche and specialized area of photography wherein talagang the specialists are the only ones doing it, na parang like for example sila Alan, they became famous for it because they were doing platinum prints. Pero nevertheless, sorry, to cut this long story short, what I'm seeing is that I seem to notice that there is parang a resurgence of the physicality and the physicality na lang. Well, let's not say alternative processes kasi even that term alternative is it's a misnomer. Diba? I mean, it became an alternative because suddenly digital photography was the dominant concept of photography. But alternative processes in a way was the original processes. No? But going back, I noticed na like for you, prior to this, would you know any other artists or photo-based artists or photographers or photo-based artists na lang para mas madaling yung reference? Would you know any other artists who were doing anthotypes earlier than 2018? Sige. Would you know anyone?
I don't know anyone. I know of one who I know of two who made chlorophyll prints. I forgot the name of the first one, but that's what he submitted for Photomoto invitational portraits. He
Hmm.
submitted a chlorophyll print of hands on a leaf. And then the other one is Anjo Borlada. He
Oh.
presented chlorophyll vinyl on vinyl gallery maybe 2 years ago. Those are the only ones I know. So I would the resurgence, if if there will be one of this one in particular, it will probably be started by me. And anyway, history is not over yet. I might still succeed in making this bigger resurgence because it's so doable by in schools, and it's just so doable in agricultural countries with little money.
Kasi yun nga, I mean, kasi since we started the conversation about in what is indigenous and what is sustainable, parang it's an interesting phenomenon then for us to just be aware of this. Because for example, syempre, also on my side, no, I mean, on your side, kasi since you're a curator, part of our job is knowing what has been done. Di ba? I mean, even as artists and photographers, part of our job is to be aware that ano na ba yung nagawa before. It's not because we want to be novel or we want to be new or different. It's just being aware. I mean, regardless if we're artists or not, as educators siguro, and you being a curator and me as a teacher, you know, if part of our job is to know what has been done. And so far, since 2000, again, that's my, you know, in a way, specialization, 2000 onwards, I haven't seen this kinds of work. I mean, some of my teachers are, you know, are artists then who focuses on photographic or photo based work, and I haven't seen that much work that is like this. I mean, it's specifically Anthotype, if you want to be more specific, Anthotype, parang never ko pa to nakita sa Pilipinas before.
Yeah, there's a really great lack of awareness and education. Um, but 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 it will trickle because worldwide last year they already had the first World Anthotype Day, and of course I participated in it. So they already have one Filipino participant, and then that'll just trickle. That'll just trickle down. There is a group called the Sustainable Dark Room. I hope I can make something like that in the future. They're the Sustainable Dark Room. This is from their manifesto. They want to define our understanding of the word sustainable and its usage to contribute to a world fit for future generations to inhabit. This encompasses sustainable relations between humans as well as non-humans within an ecosystem that entangles in political, social, and economic dimensions. The Sustainable Darkroom is committed to exploring sustainability and its nuances within the photographic spheres to develop an industry-specific response to the global ecological crisis. That is their goal. And they have artist residencies, they have what they call a photographic garden, meaning they grow all the materials like my garden. I also met people, like there's a woman I met online who was working on her master's degree in sustainable photography. She also grew a photographic garden in her house, in her home, to be able to do it. But the photographic garden of Sustainable Darkroom is open to everyone who wants to research and experiment on working with plants to make their own photographic materials.
Siguro, Steph, with that, no, I mean, since you introduced na the bigger picture, I think ito yung sabi natin prior to going online. We had a conversation. No? Siguro it's a good time then to introduce or at least reference back to how I also introduced this episode in Photography Chismis, that part of it is also a certain claim. I mean, it's not an explicit claim, wherein we say that that this kind of work, the term sustainable photography, there's an implication that prior to this, or photography outside sustainable photography can be said, or not necessarily naman criticized. We can say na it's less sustainable, because when we introduce that term sustainable photography, and you saying na there's even a global organization that tries to define through a manifesto, and manifestos are very important, no? Because these are declarations of belief. Manifestos are declarations of belief, declarations of truth. In a way, it's a truth that they see, that they want people to understand, and through that claim, they make ways on how this truth can be realized by other people. So a manifesto is very important. And what you're saying is that globally, there's a group who came up with the manifesto just recently, 2018 ba sabi mo? Tama ba? 2018?
I think so, yes.
So kung 2018 na, so very recent. And when you introduce the term sustainable photography, there is an implication or an implied idea that there is photography that is not sustainable. Siguro yun. So we're not going to identify what kind of level photography that is unsustainable. Well, siguro later na lang yan. But aside from that, what I'm saying is that this conception of photography as sustainable photography, it also gives an idea of a different worldview of photography, in the sense na in the introduction, we said that our conception of photography is a result or a product of modernity. And siguro for the benefit of people who are not familiar with the term modernity, no, please, wag niyo naman isipin na ini-trivialize ko yung background niyo. I'm just saying na for those people, to make this accessible, yung conversation na to, I just have to give an idea, a little bit of background on the term modernity. So modernity as a period that came from around 1400s to late 1800s, no? Actually, 1900s. Actually, sige, sama mo na yung 20th century. Kasi post-modernity is 1950s onward. So post-war, post-World War II. But nevertheless, aside from the periodicity of that term modernity, the associations on the discussion of modernity is the claim, or at least the implication, that the world has been defined by a certain worldview, which is, we have to accept the fact that most of how we see the world is through the lens of a Western worldview. Even photography itself, ideologically, to a certain extent, it is a product of modernity, because when it was invented, it was during the Industrial Revolution. So built right into the popular ideas of photography is that it is a mechanical process. There is techne. Siguro yung term na ginamit sa akin ni Stephen, the techne is to make. But techne also implies a divorce from poesis. Ito naman yung introduce na isa natin guest dati, si Doc Barbasa, no? So techne and poesis, both words mean in Greek to make. However, in that language of the Greek conception of the world, parang techne is the crafty, the technological part, the skills. And then you have poesis, which is creation to a certain extent of the poetic. Kaya same root word yung poesis at saka poetic. But going back to the idea of sustainable photography, the idea is that when we think of photography in a general sense, it's photography that comes out of factories. It's photography that comes out of brands, corporations. We're not saying that's wrong. We're just highlighting that fact that probably a lot of people will not notice, or syempre they're aware but they don't put emphasis on it, no? So what we think of photography right now in the contemporary world is photography that comes out of a factory. It is industrialized. It was a product of industrialization. Diba? So you have to be aware of that. And part of the industrialization, the mechanization, the to a certain extent, parang nakahon yung idea of photography. It also partly became unsustainable. Again, we're not going to be political in this, in this episode. We're just saying that there is a certain aspect of photography that is, with the introduction of the word sustainable photography, probably some photography is unsustainable. So siguro going back ang haba nung intro to. I mean, nandito rin naman na tayo, so let's just give a background on that word modernity. So in the introduction, we mentioned that this kind of photography, with the introduction of the term sustainable photography, it also implies that there is a part of photography that is not sustainable, and there's also a part, or a huge part of our conception of modernity is the Western worldview, which is commoditized, which is not necessarily a bad thing, that it's mechanized, which is also not necessarily a bad thing, a kind of photography that is formulaic. There's a certain formula, there's already a predefined aesthetic on how we make, how we read, how we produce, how we make photography known. There's a certain ideology to it that is mostly Western. So let's say pag sinabi nyo, may concept of sustainable photography, Western din yung nag-isip. Yeah, probably. But then again, it is more inclusive. To a certain extent, it's trying to make us aware that there is part of what we think of photography that could be unsustainable. And it doesn't necessarily try to topple down that idea of photography that is unsustainable. It's just making us aware that there could be a process and a thinking, a concept of sustainable photography wherein we focus on the circular relationship between a human agent, artists, photographers, viewers, readers of art, and then the environment. So siguro yun lang hina-highlight ko ang haba nung context na yun. But again, we just have to make that idea of sustainable photography, modernity, and probably a distinction, or at least an identification of a certain contrast, not necessarily opposition, probably a contrast between the modernity, the modernized or of photography as a product of modernity versus this kind of conception of photography, which is sustainable photography. Siguro later I'll also try to discuss in the sense na ideological to this also. It becomes na we think, or we can even use the same process that Steph opened to us as viewers of this episode, that we can even make this the subject. We can even work on myths, diba? I mean, something that is local and indigenous. Wherein indigenous, in a way, we're not saying that indigenous is in relation to indigenous people. We're using the term indigenous more broadly, more liberally, as the presence of a concept that is within the immediate surroundings of that conscious agent, that person, that subject, that artist. No. So when we say indigenous, we're not necessarily referring to indigenous people, but we're saying indigenous in the context of something that is closer, more intimate, more accessible, diba? To the agent, to the artist, to the person who's doing the process of photography. And through this conversation, we're saying that plants is a source of materials and processes that we can use in doing photography. And if we want to continue doing sustainable photography, then we have to let these organisms thrive. The way we do sustainable photography is not just on being artistic on the materials and the process, but also to letting these sources of materials and concepts to thrive. That plants is the source of our photography to a certain extent. Sustainable photography is saying that we have to depend on nature, on organisms, on plants, and not necessarily just ourselves. So in a way, there's a connection between the process of doing photography and our reliance, and our intimacy with the environment, the sources of our materials, of our processes, and also our understanding that photography is not all mechanized. There is a certain attachment with us and the world. We are not robots. We're not machines. There is a certain worldview of photography that is more inclusive. Haba na explanation ko. Parang hindi ko tuloy talk to. Parang ginawa ko talk na sorry, Steph, no? Parang ang dami kasi natitrigger in my head ng process mo. The Anthotypes, ang dami natitrigger. So, sorry, so
Yeah,
sorry.
some people who started exploring sustainable photography, it was triggered by the fact that they have asthma or they're pregnant and they can't breathe the harmful fumes inside the dark. So they were looking for other ways to continue photography without the harmful chemicals. And then there is something important I want to read, very, very short, about one of the other goals that I believe in of the sustainable darkroom. It aims to help equip cultural practitioners with new skills and knowledge to develop environmentally friendly photographic practices. Though linked to physical spaces and places, the sustainable darkroom is not defined by a location on the map. We have no walls, sinks, or red lights, but we are an ethos, a way of thinking and understanding. We are an uprising, a radical reformation. Taking form publications, residencies, workshops, talks, symposiums, training sessions, photographic gardens, and more. We intend to help build a community to empower each other and challenge some of the environmental impacts of darkroom practices. That's it. That's one, I suppose, thing I believe in and why I agreed to do this talk with you to show a different way, another.
Yung ano nga isa rin siguro ako para lang ma-introduce din. I mean, again, one of the points of photography chismis is also to allow, not impose, but to allow other understanding of photography aside from what we've been used to, which I will not define. What we're trying to define are the other options or the other avenues or understanding or lenses, quote unquote, on how to read images or how we read photography in general. And in a way, to a certain extent, Philippine photography. Nasa puso din ng photography chismis yung the conception of a Philippine photography. And when I hear yung sinabi mo, I cannot avoid about thinking about dialectics on how responsive this conception of sustainable photography, how it is a response. Parang built right into the concept of sustainable photography is that, again, it implies that there probably are ways of doing photography that is not sustainable. That's one. And then aside from that, it is responsive to a certain status quo. So that's where the dialectic come from, no? I mean, doon sa mga mahilig sa philosophy and art criticism, the dialectic, there is a thesis or an existing status quo. There is a response, which is sustainable photography as an antithesis or parang hindi naman opposition, but a variation of the existing status quo. And then, ang goal ng manifesto ng sustainable photography is to offer a new synthesis. So yun yung dialectic aspect of that concept of sustainable photography, that it is responding to how we conceive of photography. And what this offers as a concept also is not to be restricted by our initial understanding of photography wherein, again, the space and time to which we experience or do photography. Like, it's not a darkroom process in Anthotypes specifically. It's not necessarily a darkroom process. You don't necessarily do it in the dark. Diba? So, and then even yung concepto of the cost that is related to photography, this is something that you pick from your garden. Diba? The photographic garden, diba? Yung sustainable garden. So that even a conception of photography, having a garden, that is unheard of. That is unheard of. How do you relate a garden as a source of photography? In sustainable photography and Anthotypes provides us an avenue to understand photography in such a manner that it is something that we take care of. It's photography that we can do by taking care of the world. Having
You
a
can
diba?
grow your own materials.
Diba? Yeah, exactly. Growing your own materials. And that's mind-blowing for me. I mean, anyway, so yun. So, siguro we can go back to it later, no? Tapos siguro may 2 slides ka pa para din siguro to complete your presentation. So,
Okay. So you're just more of the same. It's also because handwritten letters are something that is fading away. People just type now on the computer. And next.
and then,
Yeah, it's just a collage of I was putting together both of my concepts. But since we are on that topic anyway, what my methods is just a fraction of what the sustainable photographers do. Some print on seaweed or develop using seaweed. Some develop with cathinol, which is a combination of coffee and vitamin C. It's really a lot. It's a rabbit hole that you might not be able to get out of if you start researching all the materials for, that is being used for sustainable photography. And this is just what I did, but if we were to put together what many people did, it will not fit in our discussion. But anyway, just limited to what can be done in the Philippines. Endless. It's unexplored. It deserves to be explored. It should be explored. And hopefully more will explore after this talk, after this discussion.
So yun, so it's 8:30 and with that siguro since 8:30 we'll open the floor to question, no? So siguro to read off from our chat box also for the benefit of those who are not here, who are going to watch this or view this or listen to this through the recorded version, no? So there's I'll just read first muna yung existing na kung ano yung nakatype na. So Cervic. So Cervic, I'm not sure if you know Cervic. Actually, I don't know who this Vic is. Pero medyo umalis na yata siya. But he posted, no? So Leslie's idea is Leslie's idea is what should photography be? The imprints we create and leave behind should not be for our own, but for the people in our world. And I think he was referring to what Steph was describing a while ago, na yung the work in the graveyard. Tama ba?
Yeah, the one in the cemetery.
Yeah. So and rin nga, even that, no. I mean, I think meron din akong na-discover recently na term sa media studies and also sa art studies. Yung term na affordance. I'm not sure kung dun sa mga listeners natin, no, if you've encountered the term affordance. So the affordance, basically affordance is the idea wherein a certain quality of reality intersects with what we can utilize or what we can use. So medyo complicated, no? So let's not get into that. Siguro I'll dedicate na lang a separate episode for that. In terms of theory, since photography chismis is heavy on theory, no. Pero kung i-apply ko yung dun sa comment ni Sir Vic, dun sa yung tinype sa chat box, the affordance here of what Steph is saying about anthotypes, the process itself of it not being permanent, or it can be permanent, but the certain ethereal, ephemeral quality of anthotypes, something that fades. Karamihan naman lahat naman ng photographs na fade, no? Pero not in the same manner that anthotypes do. And even the materials itself, the materiality, kung sa art studies meron kasi, di ba, may specific subject on material studies. Basically, if we use paint, what does paint denote and what does paint connote? What does photography denote? What does photography connote? What does plaster denote? What does it connote? To a certain extent, there is a field of study in art studies wherein the medium itself, the material itself, that what you do already has meaning, that it already has an inherent meaning outside the subject. So the material itself, it's meaningful already. That's why as artists, you are concerned of making art objects. Diba? I mean that is one of your concerns, syempre. It's not just your concern to create art objects, but one of the things that you are involved in, yun na lang. One of the things you are involved in as an artist is to create art objects, or probably a statement that you can have an art object that is not present. So nevertheless, ang point lang dito is anthotypes, the material itself, the process itself, even without the subject, even without the image, the process itself is meaningful already. That in a way, it is impermanent to a certain extent, to a certain degree. It is ethereal, ephemeral, and I think what Leslie did was to have that, to relate or to connect that idea of the ephemerality, the ethereality of this process, and the fading, and the process of fading, and the process of letting be connected. He connected it with passing away, or letting go of a concept, letting go of a person, and that meaningful process of someone being dissolved into nothingness. Diba? Someone who dies, in a way, we can say that that person becomes nothing. And yet, the point of that artwork, as explained by Sir Vic, our audience who type into the chat box, he's saying that even if you do not exist anymore, there is an imprint that you leave to the world, to other people. So it challenges our concept of what is ephemeral in the first place. What is material and what is ephemeral? What is permanent and what is impermanent? What is mortality and what is immortality? And even without an image, even without the photographic image, the process of, the medium of anthotype, regardless of the subject per se, can already point towards that idea of what is permanent and impermanent, what is mortal and immortal, what is valuable and what is trivial, what is permanent and what's ethereal and ephemeral. So there's a lot of kaya sa art studies merong part na yun and media studies, it talks about affordances, that the medium itself, the material that you choose to use for your art already is meaningful. And that's and then you add pa yung subject mo for that material. Like for example, in this case yung kay Leslie, the subject are dead relatives or people who have relatives that passed away. So that's the subject. But the materials and the medium itself of anthotypes is meaningful in itself. So yun yung to elucidate or siguro to articulate sa art studies na ganun, mayroong subject studies obviously, and then you have the material study. So what are you using as a medium? It's ideological in itself. So yun. So yun. So anything you want to add, Leslie? Steph, dun sa comment ni Sir Vic?
Yeah, no, you that's fine. That's pretty, you expounded on it pretty well.
Ang daldal ko, no, pasensya na. Parang sinigasangan ko si Steph. Sabi ko, hindi ako masasalita. Kasi show ko, no, joke lang. Nako, kasi ito sa mga audiences namin, pag narinig nyo kami ni Steph mag-usap, inaabot kami ng 5 hours, serious, 5 hours. Tapos hindi ka nakakatigil sa daldal. So,
yeah. The subject of the ephemeral photograph is something Tony does with a cake. So it can either be eaten or it can get spoiled, but it still was, it was there, it existed. I would consider it a photograph on a cake. So yeah, that thing about ephemeral photography is a whole subject in itself.
Okay. So, yung any other questions, yung ating live audiences? Si Miss Berna. Kung meron kang question, you can type it. You can also speak up if you want. You can also ask about the practice of Steph as an artist and also curator, how she is able to balance being an artist and also a curator. You can also ask that. Siguro ako isip ko, sige, since wala akong question from the audience, no. So Steph, moving forward, you mentioned na, you had your last exhibit was in 2022, I think November, no? Sa pasong tamo.
Yeah, in art informal.
Mm. So are you planning to kasi naisip ko kasi baka it's something that you learned and then you explored and then do an exhibit about and then you shift to another practice, no? Pero I'm curious,
Mm.
does Anthotypes are you planning to focus on Anthotypes in your practice as an artist? I mean, moving forward.
What I did was for that show, I presented two things, lumen prints. So that one, I was using photographic paper, but specifically expired photographic paper that was given away to me by my friends in FOTOMOTO who don't like using expired paper. So of course I asked for, I like using discards or things nobody wants or things that probably people will throw away. And I like to make art out of it. And I'm very purist about making prints using the gumamela in my garden. I'll only make a print if there's a gumamela that's going to die. If there's no gumamela that day, I cannot make a print. So to make that show, it took me an entire year. So a good thing the gallery owner, Tina, gave me a whole year to make that show. And when I exhibited it, for an entire year, I had a miniature dollhouse, bahay kubo. I was planting plants all over it. And over time, the plants became very thick and lush and was covering the entire bahay kubo. Some of those plants were planted by myself and some of the plants were planted by the birds and the wind. So a lot of my practice has to do with leaving control to nature, like letting nature. I only have one hand in it. The other hand in it is nature. Whether it's the lumen print or I did it's called the living installation. The overgrown bahay kubo. So I displayed it in the gallery with solar lights, so that it would live while it's in the gallery, and it's still very much alive and well. My living installation, which represents my home, because that's where I started all of this. And also telling people you can do it even if you're in your own house. You can do this process even if you're stuck at home. Yeah, so a lot of my practice has to do with that, a reliance on nature.
Galing. I was supposed to say na yun nga, parang it shifts that agency of an artist. I mean, it doesn't necessarily completely shift, but it parang provides a different dimension to how we think of authorship and being an artist, in the sense that usually when we think of being an author or being an artist or a creative agent, we think of it as an agency that we as agents, we have the power, we have the valence to impose or create and manipulate the natural world. Parang ganun, diba? So even if you go to philosophy also that thread of the conscious agent having the capacity to manipulate the world, whether it's either the world of metaphysics or the world of the physical, to make sense and to create something. That's usually associated with our agency. But then again, what Steph was saying, that reliance of you as an agent, you are all still dependent. You are dependent. I mean, at least in the context of what Steph was saying, she was dependent on nature. She was reliant. Pag if nature didn't provide, shucks, wala akong show. So parang, and di ba, parang in a way, parang we think of artists as militants. We can even in the language of religion, diba, we are sa Catholicism, yung word na militant, no? But the idea is we are living in this world and we have the role to create. But then again, if we look at the process of Steph, we want to, but we have to be reliant. We cannot just think of the world as something that is instrumental. We don't see a plant as something it's a tool. It's something that I can use. In a way, there is a certain aspect to it that when we think of the environment or the natural world, there is an imposition of our agency or our power and to manipulate it or make sense out of it. But then again, what this process highlights is a certain respect and reliance and dependence of our agency to a greater worldview that we cannot live just by our agency. We have to we don't we in a sense we don't see the world as something that you need to overcome. Kadalasan when we think of agency and being an artist, you think of it as you have to overcome or you have to put in effort to reach a goal. It's teleolog. Okay, introduce ko yung term kasi mahilig ako sa philosophy. It's teleological. You are imposing. There is a certain end that you want to achieve. There is a goal. And yet this process of the sustainable photography and anthotypes specifically, it reminds you that na probably you have a goal, but you are still dependent. Diba? The telos or the end goal is not necessarily just up to you. You have to have respect. Pag hindi binigay sa'yo ng environment, then wala kang show. Diba? Parang
it's a collaboration with nature. So the maker of the artwork is Stephanie plus nature.
yun nga, diba? Diba? Exactly.
Yeah, it's a collab with nature. So yes, my next show going forward, of course, I cannot reveal the details, is still the same. A collaboration with nature. That, yeah, if nature doesn't cooperate, I won't have a show. But that's
show.
I like that.
Hindi kasi for example sa'yo, your dependence on environment, on the natural. Ako naman kasi ang dependence ko is on the machine. My dependence is on the printer, on the cake. If no one bakes for me and no one prints an image for me because I'm not the one who's printing my images. In a way, for me, I mean, hindi lahat. I mean, in my cake project, photography for me is just texting someone. That is photography. It's not even me creating an image. It's me thinking of an image, asking someone to do it for me. So my reliance, in a way, is in the opposite side of what you're doing. Now, for me, it's the factory. I mean, factory not in the not literal factory, but the machine. It's the production machine that even the cake is. I mean, I chose to use a commercially available cake. It's not something that I bake. It's something that I buy off the shelf of the shop. And actually, ang interesting, I just realized the icing of that cake, even for 1 month, it doesn't spoil. I'm just thinking, so how grabe, sobrang artificial na ng commercially available cake. That I think in FOTOMOTO when I did that that cake, someone was asking, how can the icing not break down in 3 days, because sugar breaks down when exposed to air. But that baker who saw my work naman, that person was curious. So anong ginamit niyang dito ng not coagulant, but parang if we use sugar, that image would have broken down. And yet for me, technically it's just 1 day, but I have some samples of the icing that I got from my previous cake projects, and they're still alive. I mean, that's 3 months ago. I mean, 2 months ago. And the icing has not spoiled. Syempre, hindi ko tinitikman, but it still holds form. So imagine ko, that is a complete example of how commercial things, how quote-unquote artificial or artifice, I mean, with the highlight on the artifice or the appearance of what is a cake and what is a photograph. Yun naman yung side ko. So, kailangan natin gumawa ng show together kasi parang sa'yo, reliance on this. Ako naman reliance on the machine. I mean, society on society as a machine. If for example, there is no big shop that I buy, even again, I buy it. I don't make it. I buy it. I buy the image, I buy the cake, I put them together and I do an exhibit. I mean, syempre guys, yung mga naman nakakinig dito, ano ba naman teacher ng photography? Hindi pala marunong mag-shoot. Marunong ako mag-shoot, okay? Ano lang, specific lang to that cake project. That is the point. My reliance to culture and society as a machine. Kaya,
Yeah,
diba? So,
that's it. I mean, we can wrap it up.
sige, sige. So with that, no, so we ano I again I would like to thank Miss Stephanie Frondoso for joining us tonight. No, it's a Saturday night, but she's here trying to trying to be patient with us in explaining her process, and also what she's introducing. In a sense, she's not the first to do it, but in a way, in the context of what we know is contemporary Philippine photography. For me, even being a teacher, this sounds new. When in fact, even if you read the books, even the references of Steph, this was 19th century or 18th century photography, and yet in the Philippines, this is the first time you would see it. I mean, aside from Steph, she mentioned only one or two people who were doing this. So parang I don't even know anyone who did this in the 70s or 80s. To a certain extent, Steph is parang making a name for this kind of process, and for herself also as an artist. Because I mean, it's something that now it's substantial to a certain extent that we should notice it, and it's noticeable. So it becomes part of that historical process of what we think is contemporary photography, wherein suddenly you have Anthotypes, which is a 19th century, 18th century process, and now you're seeing it in past 20, in 2023. Diba? I mean, there's a lot of things that can be said about that as well. No? So with that, before I let you go, Steph, siguro final words.
Uh, um, oh. Well, thank you for joining us, and hope you learned something new. Hope you will experiment at home. And share with us your experiments on anthotypes and on chlorophyll prints on leaves.
Yun. So with that, no, so thank you for the live audience, and also those who are listening to this or watching this through the recorded version. So we have a lot